is Girard at Large, and I am your host, Rich Girard. Thanks for tuning in. Our time is 7:07. Our station is AM 1250 WGAM. You can find us on the web at girardatlarge.com and also on Facebook and Twitter at Girard at Large. As we continue to explore student violence in our schools and how they're handled both at the building level and the police level and the administrative level and the laws and all that fun stuff that guide what our professionals do. We are joined by school committee woman Sarah Ambrogi. She represents Ward 1 in Manchester's North End and is here because she sits on the Student Conduct Committee. Now, I will spare her having to tell us that she can't comment about the specifics of any particular case that may end up before her committee. This we know, correct?
Correct.
And I want to thank, by the way, the chairman of your committee, Deb Langdon, from Ward 2, also in the North End, for recommending that I speak to you, because I spoke to her first as the chair of the committee.
Of course.
And as you know, she's a teacher in another school district, and my show just interferes with her ability to get to work. But we know she's tuning in, and we appreciate the fact that she took time to call us and talk to us and make the recommendation.
Great.
So, Sarah, we had this incident in Memorial, and I think we've done a pretty good job speaking with the superintendent, you know, the Lieutenant Legacy from the, and I'm sorry, Scott, I just can't say legacy. I'm too good a French kid, you know, I'm too good a French kid to say legacy when it's Legacy. And we spoke with the mayor. And what we're trying to do is give everybody a perspective on how the system, I'll refer to it, handles this. And you're part of the system because not only are you a member of the school board, but you're a member of the conduct committee.
Correct.
And what I'm looking to understand from you, Sarah, is when does the Student Conduct Committee get involved in these matters? At what point, what triggers that involvement? Because I want to explore whether or not the triggers are appropriate.
Okay, it's a good question. If people are interested in kind of reviewing what I'm saying, you know, I'm not making this up. I'm actually relying on the Student Code of Conduct, which was revised and approved by the Board of School Committee in 2010, in June of 2010. So all of this is, everything I'm referring to is very clearly laid out there. Basically, the way it works is you can think of it as kind of an incident that takes place at a school. The first line of defense, or the first time that incident is reviewed, is of course by the building, you know, the building staff, the principal in the school. The principal has the ability to investigate any kind of incident and to make a finding, and if appropriate, according to the Code of Conduct, to for example, order that student suspended, suspend that student.
They can suspend for up to 10 days without
Correct.
the approval or involvement of the superintendent.
Correct.
Now, do they, at the building level, if there's violence involved and there's harm caused through that violence, in this case, we have a broken nose, we have a concussion, she needs corrective surgery as a result of the attack. Is there any requirement that the building level administrator report that to the superintendent?
In other words, basically the way we look at incidents is with 4 levels. So, you know, a first level offense, a second level, third level, fourth level. When you get up to something that is a level 4 offense, while it's not required, certainly one piece, of course, is that when you get to that level, you are dealing potentially with a criminal act, and so of course the police would be involved. So that's one other really important thing to remember, is there's always 2 systems, there's potentially 2 systems working in a parallel fashion. The Code of Conduct and the discipline through the school board, and ultimately through the school board, and any kind of criminal investigation, police action, etc.
Which is why we had Lieutenant Legacy.
Right. So that makes sense. So it is still at that point. It is still up to the building principal to decide if it is an incident that rises to the level of something that needs more than a 10-day suspension. In which case he or she must refer it to central office, to the district administration.
But only if he wants to go over 10 days. So if in this case, other than the practicality of it, again, I don't want to talk about practicality. I want to talk about what is required. In this case, the principal, Arthur Adamakis, unless he wanted to suspend for more than 10 days, would not have to report this incident to the superintendent. Is that a correct understanding?
I guess it's a correct understanding. However, let me say right away that that is in practice that is not how it works.
No, that's what I said. Practice aside.
Right. But
Now, should it
there
be
is.
codified though? Should it be the case that anytime a student is harmed in an act of violence, or a teacher is harmed in an act of violence by anybody in the building, especially a student, should it be required, if for only notification purposes, should it be required to be reported to the superintendent?
Possibly, and I think that the fact is that that is the way we operate, that every incident gets reported not only to the administration but also to the school board. We're always notified when there's been an incident.
Okay, well, I was going there. I was going to get to the school board.
Yeah, I mean, so, but the superintendent, and it's the superintendent who notifies us when there's been an incident. We don't get notified by the building principal. We get notified by the superintendent. So, and I may be missing something here in terms of, but I don't believe it is codified as a requirement.
Okay.
But it is certainly, the definition of a level 4 offense is that a level 4 offense are acts which result in violence to another person or property, or which pose a direct threat to the safety of others in the school. These acts are clearly criminal and are so serious that they always require administrative action, which result in the immediate removal of a student from school, the intervention of law enforcement, and action by the Board of School Committee. So it says New Hampshire school authorities are obligated to report clearly established criminal offenses to law enforcement authorities. So I think when you get to a level 4 offense, even if it doesn't say here it must report to the superintendent, it is clear that there is a reporting requirement because it is a criminal act, and so therefore there's going all of the consequences that flow out from that.
Now, the superintendent, in our interview, mentioned that the school conduct committee only gets involved in cases if he refers them to them.
That is also correct.
And that absent any sort of expulsion, the superintendent has complete discretion and authority to act without the knowledge or involvement of the school board.
The superintendent, if the superintendent is able to extend the suspension by 10 further days, if the school, and during that...
Actually, here, I just want to make sure you're clear on this, because he said that he has the opportunity to suspend for the rest of the school year. That what he cannot do is expel, which is a suspension for a full year or longer. I just want to make sure my understanding of that is correct.
That is generally every case that comes to us is for expulsion, but we are able to grant long-term suspensions as well. I was reviewing the statutes last night, and it's
right. Now you're able to grant them, but as a practical matter, is it not the case that you only are that there's nothing that requires the superintendent to come before or to refer cases to the student conduct committee, short of expulsion? So if he decided that 30 days out of school would be, and I don't want to get lost in the weeds on this because I think there's a larger point. But let's just, for the sake of argument, say that really the only thing required to be referred to are expulsion cases.
That is correct. Under statute, that's correct.
Should it be that way? And again, this is not a commentary on Superintendent Brennan, because I'm pretty confident that he's got a very low tolerance with these types of things and probably deals with them rather severely. Although we can never know because it's all protected by juvenile law.
Right.
And confidentiality and all this other crap, which frankly I think really does a lot of damage to our ability to effectively deal with this, because if everything has to be kept in secret, then no one can really know what's going on, and I think that creates a lot of stress at various levels. But that's a conversation for a different time, or maybe it's not. But should there be a greater, even just maybe a reporting requirement of certain types of offenses? Because there are two offenses that are alleged here. There is the obvious physical violence, okay, which, should you, as a matter of right, whether it's dealt with administratively, should the school board receive, or your committee, the conduct committee, should it receive regular reports on certain types of offenses?
I think that there...
Whether you sit and review them or not.
Right, and I think you're right, and we've had some discussions of this, and actually I do think that you are onto something there, and there is there have been attempts, in the past, what's happened is that the conduct committee has reported back out to the school board, in general, the types of cases that have come before us. What you're saying is a different kind of general review, and we actually did review some information of this type last year. I think it's not a bad idea, and I actually think it's something that would be helpful, would be to have, on a regular basis, not just when it comes up as an issue, an idea of what kinds of incidents have taken place, and the numbers, not necessarily,
And what was done about it?
well, I think the problem that you get into there is you do need to protect confidentiality, and that is not something, we didn't make up the confidentiality rules. They are imposed by statute. So there's not much we can, and we protect the confidentiality of students, but in general, we could talk in general terms about whether a consequence was, what was dealt or not. Remember, and I know that you're not gonna like my reminding you about this, but there is also a whole other process that takes place, and I know you know where I'm going on this, and that is that in each of these incidents, there may need, if it is a student who has a disability, determined to have an educational disability, there's a whole other determination that needs to be made, and that imposes a whole additional level of confidentiality.
We're so serious about bringing things to light that when I had Congressman Bass, who in his prior terms of office was known as the special education guy because of his, his fight in Washington to make sure that the feds were sending the money that they should be sending, I asked him point blank about those federal laws that make it impossible, virtually impossible, for the Manchester School District or any school district to discipline kids with disabilities. And he said if he got information from the Manchester School District about how it was hurting their ability and what the consequences in the classroom were, he would work on that, on changing the law to reflect that in its reauthorization. So I know that's a problem. It's not a problem in this case, but that said, I think there would probably be some value. I'm thinking from my days back on the board, the Committee on Accounts and Enrollment, which is more or less sort of a procedural committee. But why not have data going to the Student Conduct Committee on a regular basis that shows what's happening in the schools? And you guys do this all in non-public session anyway, so you can have whatever discussion that you want, but whatever reports are generated for the public can be categorized. Generally speaking, we had this, and this, and the consequences to the students ranged anywhere from 3 nights detention to 5 days suspension, etc., etc. So you can start to get a feel for what's actually happening in the buildings. And then if you start to identify patterns and areas of difficulty, you as policymakers now are in first-hand possession of the information, and now you can start to build a case for a guy like Charlie Bass, and probably Frank Ginta, and probably Kelly Ayotte, and maybe Jean Shaheen, to be able to go to the Congress and say, this is what's happening in our state's largest school district because of this crazy law. We need to change this.
Right, I mean, and I'll remind you that, we assume that if we were to have all the data, that it would actually add up to a problem. We don't know that because we don't.
No, we don't know that. And if we did know that it didn't add up to a problem, though, then we could let that dog lie, couldn't we?
Right, we could, and that would probably, because I hear it brought up a lot, and I've never seen actual facts that would add up. I hear anecdotal, well, this was really a problem in this particular situation, but does that add up to really an issue that we really need to fight?
But it probably, and I think it's at least as big a problem that we don't know. And so back to my question, and again, not in any way to sort of impugn the superintendent, but shouldn't there be a stream of information, especially when it comes down to violent acts in the schools, that are, regardless of whether or not you leave him the opportunity to deal with it as he is currently dealing with it, shouldn't there be a consistent stream of information that goes to your committee that says, this is what we dealt with this month, this is what happened in the buildings this month,
Right.
Because it doesn't seem to me, to be perfectly honest with you, that the policymakers are necessarily engaged with the administrators, and I don't know how big a disconnect there is between what they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis and what you guys know about what's going on and how you can handle it. And I think that might be a function of the information you do and don't get.
Right, I mean, there's not a lot of information that we do get, and I know that the administration feels extremely confined by all the confidentiality issues, and I respect that. I think it's something certainly worth discussing as to whether there ought to be a stronger connection and a way of reporting generalized information. As you may or may not know, the Student Conduct Committee, in my 2 terms on that committee, we only have convened when there is a specific incident that has been referred to us for review.
And that generally involves expulsion.
Generally involves an expulsion or some other form of long-term consequence. And it's those conduct committees are set up as hearings that are at the student's decision, held in non-public session. They can be held in public session, but I've never had that happen. And we review information, and it is a quasi-judicial proceeding in which we render a decision.
And your decision is appealable to the State Board of Education.
Correct.
All right. Now the other issue I want to get to here, though, because there's the visible violence that was conducted, but the friends of the girl who has committed the violence have been pounding my Facebook page, even called in this morning, a couple of them, and a number of people have called, not willing to go on air, that have said, more or less, she deserves it. And that I'm being sort of slanted in my presentation that's going on because she's the biggest, to quote one of them, cyberbully at Memorial. Are there policies in place in the school code of conduct? Now, I make no judgment of whether that is a correct statement or not a correct statement. I'm learning a whole lot about how students exist and interact through social media like Facebook. Is the code of conduct silent on so-called cyberbullying? Does the school, in its investigation of these incidents, ever really take a look at what's happening in social media? Because there are a lot of people who are telling us now, not just in this incident, but many others, that social media is a catalyst for a lot of what's happening in the schools.
Right.
That isn't good.
Right.
How do we address that? Or can we address that because that's not happening on school time?
There you've put your finger on the issue. That's the problem. I mean, it really, it is something that's kind of outside the scope because it is taking place off of school grounds. However, I know it's of great concern, and I know that the administration, we have talked about this issue, and I know they thought about this issue when they were redesigning the code of conduct. It is very difficult, much as it would be if an incident took place on the weekend, an actual physical incident took place on the weekend away from school grounds. That's not. It isn't within the scope of what we deal with. So it's really a problem. I think this cyberbullying, this social media issue, is really.
So that's more of a sort of a criminal law enforcement kind of side of it. If children are enduring cyberbullying, then they should use the laws that the state of New Hampshire has passed.
Correct.
And they should report it to their local police department and let them do what they do, because it really does fall outside the purview of the schools.
Now, I think that there is, it's possible. And I think that under the bullying law that there is, it is possible that an incident could get reported through a school medium if there was some way of connecting it back to something that was happening in school.
Either that, or the schools, if little Susie goes to the principal's office and says, Billy's making fun of me on Facebook, then the school authorities can refer it to the proper authorities for that sort of thing.
Right. I mean, and of course, remember that even though students are not supposed to be using their cell phones during the school day, of course, I'm sure that they are in many instances. And
well, in this case, there apparently were a group of them that had their cell phones at the ready for the fight that they had been told about was coming as this girl was ambushed. And I actually have a video. I was sent a video, and I'm toying with whether or not I'm going to post it, and only toying with it because, to be honest with you, it's a very low quality video. It's very hard to see and hear what's going on. So I don't know what value it is, but I know someone was ready for it.
Right. When I get my point is that a lot of the social media, I know Facebook, for example, there's an app for your phone, so there may be people who are actually cyberbullying at school. It's very possible, and that I think would raise a whole another way of going about it, and it might be something that could be addressed.
Now, I do have one final question here. We're a bit over time, but I'm going to go with it anyway. And I don't know this to be true or not true, but one of the things I have been told is that one of the people who did tape it on their phone was suspended for 5 days, not because they knew about the fight and were ready to tape it, but because they taped it and it was in violation of the school's use of electronics policy. Does that make any sense to you if that's true? That it almost seems like a misplaced punishment. Not that you knew the fight was coming, we're going to suspend you for not doing anything to prevent it, but because you had your cell phone out, we're taking pictures, you violated the electronic policy. And frankly, as a parent, I almost want kids to have the freedom to video or tape or whatnot if they saw an incident, because we call that evidence in the real world, and it would help take people who did something and put them in a place they belong, which is
Right.
not in a school.
Right. I mean, there may have been facts that I'm not aware of that would have led to a different characterization of what actually took
Right,
place.
that's why I said it as is. But if that report that I've gotten from someone in the school, and no, it wasn't the victim, if that report that I got from someone in the school is accurate, does that make any sense to you at all as a policymaker in the city?
I think my concern about somebody doing that is that actually adding fuel to the fire of the incident? And if that's the case, then I think it is appropriate to say, no, you're not supposed to have your cell phone anyway. And then the fact that you had it and you were using it to perhaps even amplify what had happened or make things worse, I have a problem with that. So,
well, and I don't dispute that. I would just say that my bigger problem is the fact that the kid knew the fight was coming and didn't do anything to head it off.
right. I mean, there's a lot of things wrong with what sounds like what happened, was that people were actually looking forward to it as opposed to listening to any sense they might have of a duty to try to head things off or to try to report things to authorities, and nobody did that.
Yeah, and at what point, though, do we maybe even look at the school and say, how did this happen in a hallway? Where were the teachers? They didn't see the pack coming. They apparently weren't in the hallway close enough to be able to act. The superintendent says, they were there within, they were within 10 feet or 20. The girl got clubbed pretty good before
Right.
she found the vice principal. You know what I mean? So there's just a lot that I don't get. But unfortunately, we're out of time. Would you be willing to come back and discuss this further as it unfolds?
Sure, absolutely.
All right, Sarah Ambrogi, School Committee Woman from Ward 1, member of the Student Conduct Committee of the Manchester School Board. We thank you for joining us here this morning on Girard at Large. This actually, in my opinion, is one of the more interesting interviews that we've done on the topic, so thank you.
You're very welcome.
Steve, how are the roads? We are joined by Dr. Jeffrey Czarnec,
Good morning.
as we are every morning at this time.
Oh, Thursday mornings.
Right, Thursday morning. Every Thursday morning at this time. Actually, every morning at this time. Oh, and that roar of the lion means if you're caller number 6, you will get 2 tickets to the Monarchs game this Saturday night at 7 o'clock. So caller number 6.
Sweet.
So Jeff, as you know,
Yes.
you're a retired Manchester police officer.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to be able to ask you a question. Oh, I got to give the number 647-1250 if you want to be caller number 6. 647-1250 for the Monarchs game this weekend. 2 tickets. We've been talking about school violence and how it gets handled in the schools, how it gets handled by the police.
Right.
And one of the things that has really aggravated me in all of these discussions are what people can and can't say because of the laws protecting juvenile offenders. Let me ask you point blank.
Well, what do you want to know?
Let me ask you point blank. In a situation like this, where the victim, by the way, is not a juvenile, the victim is 18,
Mm-hmm.
but the perpetrator is a juvenile. In a situation like this, is there anything productive, anything good about protecting the identity of a kid who has committed an act of violence?
I think so, because first of all, they're going to be thrust into the system inevitably, right? You're going to go to juvenile court, they're going to have to answer for charges, etc., unless they're certified as an adult. I don't know all the facts of the particular case. I don't think this person is, but the system is designed to rehabilitate the child.
Why does a
right?
child need Why does a child need to be, buried under a rock to be rehabilitated? Because
yeah.
the other half of this is, the victim who came forward because I asked her, okay, on my Facebook page and calls that I'm getting, both ones that we're putting up on the air and ones that don't want to go up on the air, I'm getting pounded for not giving the other girl's side. But I can't give the other girl's side because no one can tell me who the other girl is. And even if I know, I'm not sure that the law is clear that I can expose it as a member of the media.
Right. Well, I think it's a matter of philosophically speaking, they don't want to further stigmatize the child. I mean, it's just a person here that...
The child gave somebody a concussion and broke her nose so badly that she needs reconstructive surgery. Why are we trying to protect the child who committed the act of violence instead of dealing with them in the light of day?
And this has been going on for a very long time, not just this week, forever. I mean, the protection, the quote, the key word that I hit on that you gave to me that when we did our preemptory discussion on this was leniency. I said, you know, yeah, this is all about the leniency thing if you think about it. I mean, in a way, it sounds like we're modeling or mollycoddling or just basically overprotecting these children who can commit a rather sophisticated act. The thing is, she didn't commit it as an adult, which, according to biologists and psychologists, is fully capable of understanding risk and reason and rhyme and consequence. And a child at this particular stage of life allegedly does not know that. So, with that in mind, they're going to protect the child at pretty much any cost, so the child has an opportunity to grow into a productive adult.
Why,
If this kid's,
okay.
you know, I know what you're saying.
No,
and
no,
I
no,
know.
no. How,
We all want someone's
okay.
head.
No, it's not that I want somebody's head. It's just I disagree fundamentally with the premise that protecting the assailant is going to allow them to develop into a productive adult. Seems to me that if what I'm going to get is 10-day suspension and be good from the from the juvenile the juvenile judge,
Right.
that I just got off after breaking somebody's nose, requiring them to have surgery, giving them a concussion for an attack, which, for whatever people want to say about what cyberbullying took place to provoke it, for an attack that was done in response to no physical threat whatsoever.
Right. And you know what?
So what is the message that we are sending to these kids?
Right. You know what? I'm not disagreeing with that. You know, there needs to be an enhanced, say, level of scrutiny of someone who can do something this heinous. I agree with you there. So the problem is here you're talking about rights that are, it's not a matter of a we, it's a systemic issue that has been argued in the juvenile courts and the juvenile system for over 100 years.
Now, Lieutenant Legacy was here.
Yep.
And he said that the girl in this case could not be arrested because the officer did not witness firsthand the assault. What sense does that make?
Well,
It's not like she denied it.
Right. It's a matter of what the law requires relative to, if it's an alleged misdemeanor, it's got to hurt in his presence. Otherwise, not for anything. You don't want to lose.
So this isn't a juvenile thing. This is a misdemeanor thing, or
Well,
this is a juvenile thing?
I'm kind of coming out of left field on this one because I don't know what the officer did see or saw, and I don't.
The officer saw nothing.
Yeah, I don't want to. Okay, that's.
The officer saw
Right.
nothing. The officer was not present,
Right.
did not see the assault.
I can only conjecture if in fact there might have been some information that might have led him to think possibly it was a mutual combatant issue, and all the facts had to be played out first. In other words, they do a full investigation about who the actual assailant was, who's guilty, or who's most likely going to be guilty as charged with a level of mens rea, who owns the act. If he operated in haste, right, and made an arrest right then and there without sufficient facts or information of a probable cause, then at the end of the day, they might lose the arrest, right?
Right, and I'm not saying she should have supposedly been arrested on the spot, because I
Right.
understand what took place here.
Right.
He interviewed the assailant before he interviewed the victim.
Right.
Found the assistant principal, got taken to the nurse's office for obvious reasons.
And the problem is sometimes,
But so what happened now? You interview the assailant, and you find out, yep, I attacked her.
only after, if they decide to speak with you in the presence of an adult or responsible guardian, and only after they have decided to relinquish their rights under Miranda, etc., which are quite lengthy and involved. I don't know if the lieutenant got a chance to explain that. The system is, the adult mechanisms are in place that do protect the juvenile. Trust me, Rich, I have been there, and I can give you...
That's why I'm having this conversation with you.
Here's a horror story for you from a newspaper article, and I was kind of looking up leniency, just what does leniency really have to do, because I think that's a thematic issue here. The system seems to be overprotecting some of these people that drive you crazy, right?
Well,
I'm going to read you an excerpt from an article.
It seems to be protecting the perpetrators at the expense of the victims.
And I'm not going to say it doesn't. And do I have an answer for you? No, but this is not a new argument. There are trends that have affected the system. You had to get tough on juvenile crime back in the 80s and then the early 90s, etc., with crack and all the firearm issues that were occurring at the time. A great program.
So you found an article on leniency.
I'm looking, like I said, doing a little browsing around, and up pops this really cool article. So I'm reading it without thinking what the context is. And it's a quasi-editorial about some of juvenile crimes in Philadelphia. And so I won't read the whole thing, but it says, Police Commissioner Gibbons has put his finger on one prime factor that looms impartial explanation for all of the litany of issues they're having relative to crime. Thousands of potential thieves and murderers are loose on Philadelphia's streets because they go free in spite of innumerable arrests. And it says customarily, there as in so many places, the notion took hold in a more innocent age that there was something different and special about offenders under 18 years of age, right? Customarily, except in the rarest circumstances, they are put on probation or placed in their parents' custody after any arrest, even for crimes of violence. This is true even if they are chronic repeaters. Recent examples include arrest of a 17-year-old with 17 previous arrests, a 16-year-old with 6 priors, 1 for murder, and a 15-year-old with 4 early arrests. And the acts of these youngsters, just lost your battery.
The actions of these youngsters.
Yes, what goes on, it says, you know what, we've got to do something about this. This is terrible. The system is much too lenient. And that is from the Philadelphia newspaper printed in 1958. A year after I was born. So what has changed? Not much.
Well,
so you're saying your reflection is the same thing that was occurring 50 years ago.
But the fact that nothing's changed, I mean, can we honestly look at society today and say since 1958, when that article was written, that we've gotten any better under a system that does not acknowledge the seriousness of what these kids do? Now, I don't mean to say that the cheerleader that, yes, I said she was a cheerleader. I don't mean to say that the girl, the cheerleader who committed this act of violence, is necessarily a bad kid.
Right.
It might be a first-time thing. It could be a lot of stuff. I don't know, but it doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is, does the punishment, does the way juvenile crime is handled, either in a school or outside of a school? Because Lieutenant Legassi basically told me if this thing had happened, if it come down on Elm Street the same way, we would have handled it the same way. If we didn't see it, we'd have to give the girl a ticket to appear in court.
You know what? I'm old
It's like a
enough.
traffic violation.
I can tell you this. I'm old enough to see the pendulum have gone the other way. When I first came on the job in good old 1979, the system wasn't quite as surrogate as it is now. Okay, we had what we affectionately called curbside justice. And so if a kid did something wrong, you got them in they had a schoolyard fight, something similar to this. Yeah, there might have been some prosecutorial actions or an arrest, etc. Right? But more often than not, it was the nape of the neck, brought the child home, the offender back to mom and dad, and that was the court of reckoning right there. That has long since been eliminated. And when I saw that happen, I was really dumbfounded because you saw the parents, and I don't want to get into the whole sociological argument when you talk about the parent, the children, the flower children in the 60s became parents, and they were quasi-anti-authoritarian to begin with, so when a police officer showed up at the door with a young offender, all of a sudden the argument, how dare you bring my child here, you naughty Nazi police officer, I say. And they're like, what are you kidding me? The kid just did 6 burglaries and beat somebody up. You did it. It became so accusatory in tone, so everything shifted to, you know what, everyone goes to court. Everyone goes to court. And now you have an overwhelmed system, okay, in place where the children can have, the right to an attorney. And an attorney, they're required to defend vigorously, and they're going to use all the mechanisms in place to make sure that the rights of the child are protected, including not releasing Junior's name to the papers, so the public can, there's an outcry, whatever it means for them to put him in the paper.
But Jeff, let me ask you a question. Let me get back to something we started with. The cloak of secrecy that juvenile offenders are entitled to.
Right.
I mean, even if they go to juvenile court, they're not. Juvenile court ain't conducted in public. There is no sunshine in juvenile court. You might see them going in, you might see them going out, unless they're wearing the name tag saying, "Hi, my name is, Jenny."
And the victim won't know either.
And the victim won't know it. And no disposition of juvenile court is ever made public. You don't know who went in. You don't know what they were charged with. You don't know what the outcome was. How in God's name does this confidentiality advance the cause of justice, which in my little wooden head seems to me that if people suffer a just consequence for an action committed, they are less likely to do it again.
In theory. I know what you're saying.
Well, the practice hasn't exactly shown us that the system works.
Right. You've got 2 camps, and I know which camp you're in, and I have legs kind of in both camps.
You know who else is in my camp?
I've seen success.
You know who else is
and
in my
I've
camp?
seen failure.
The mother. You know who else is in the camp? That mother in I think it was Madison, Wisconsin, who saw 2 of her children in one of those. You know how the thing is now. they've got these swarming these swarms of kids that invade like convenience stores and rip them off blind and then run out.
Right.
You know who's in my camp? The mother who saw two of her children in one of those swarms in one of the videos, and brought her kids forward publicly to say, you are an embarrassment to me, you are a shame on our family, and you will suffer the consequences of the law. I'm turning you in.
That's old school.
You know what?
To see that really kind of just warms the cuckolds of my heart to see a parent step forward like that, because like I said, cynically, on the front lines.
But you can imagine what the children advocates said.
How about this one? Can you have time for an example? I had about 3.5 months, 2 months to retire. And I was ready to retire, move on to my second career. Get a call for a loud party in the north end of the city. I get there. Now this house had been, kind of a target or a hotspot for beer keg parties. The parent wasn't there, et cetera, right? Knock on the door. Kid opens up the door. He's in overalls and he's drunk. I can't leave. Now I was 17. He said he was 17 years old. In his own slurred fashion, how old are you? Do you live here? I had no idea, so I stepped inside the vestibule of the house. And I established the fact that this was the child who lived there. His mother was gone somewhere else, and then you heard a little scattering at the back and the bottles breaking. It was like that. And he had just polished off 2 bottles of Colt 45, which would have just about killed me. Right? And
only because you have taste.
Okay, so anyway, I said, let's see if the voice of reason can prevail here. We'll bring mom home, and perhaps I can just deliver the child, the 17-year-old drunk, directly into the hands of the mom, okay? So he says, well, let me call my mom. So he whips out the cell phone. Now he had a sober friend who was there, he was trying to be the voice of reason to no avail. So he isn't, he's talking to his mom, and then he starts swearing. The blank police are here, blah, blah, blah. So he goes, here, my mother wants to talk to you. I go, oh, great. This is gonna be case solved, right? Well, she launches into a tirade against me, calling me every name of the book, demanding to know why I'm in her house, where I could, by law, could not leave. I had to secure that child, because if I left, and he ended up with,
He ended up going
toxic
for a drive.
failure or something, right? Or he died. Hello, you're the key to my house, right? So she's yelling and screaming. So I had no choice but to bring the young boy down to the station, and eventually his mother did come down there. And she never calmed down. It was quite an episode, to be quite frank. And I'll never forget it, because 3 years later, just before the window closed on the opportunity to sue me, she sued me. Okay? And
For what? Responding to a call?
for violating the Fourth Amendment rights, treading on bounds where I'm not supposed to be in light of the
Who was the
language of the
jerk lawyer who
Constitution.
filed that?
I was a little scared, because the lawyers that represented me, very, very good lawyers, but when we were bound by the Kingston decision, I had to explain it to them. I was scared, to be honest with you. I said, you've got to be kidding me. I literally, in some respects, if you look at it, this kid had drank so much it could kill a dog. I saved his life. But I was still being sued. Does that make any sense?
No,
it
but
doesn't.
what are the laws
This
that
is
enable
a systemic issue,
Right,
Rich.
what
I
are
know
the
what you're
laws
saying.
that enable that, Jeff?
Kingston decision.
What's
When-
the Kingston?
you went
Is that a
down-
New Hampshire
you went
decision?
down- yeah. Many, many years ago, back in the 80s.
Can you send me a link to that so we can post it
Oh,
on
sure.
our website?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Before you get into that, there's one question I have to ask.
I don't mean to be so cynical, but when
I-
you think of these episodes, you go,
But that's why I'm doing this.
she didn't win, by the way. Well, the court threw it out because the grade rating was ludicrous. It
Well,
was just frivolous.
who is the jerk lawyer who brought the suit?
I don't remember his name. He's really not a bad guy. I don't know why he was thinking.
No, he's a jerk lawyer.
All right
all right.
then. Well, okay.
So, but here's one question I do have to ask, because I know Eddie in Manchester asked me to ask this, and I forgot. But what needs to happen for a child to be charged as an adult? At what point does it go from being a juvie offense to an adult
Adjudicated a
offense?
child an adult. They have to petition the county attorney, if I recall correctly, the process to show that the act involves a level of sophistication that's unprecedented, that there's probably continuity in conduct, that this child really did what he was extraordinarily conscious of what he did.
So in other words, if there were evidence that this young lady planned the attack, and sort of assembled it and whatnot, that is something that they would consider in determining whether or not to charge her as a juvenile or an adult.
Right, but it doesn't happen all that much. The best of my recollection, I may be wrong, but I did check some of the trends, and it's actually gone down as far as certification of adult children into the adult world. But there's quite a few. There's about 1,000, or maybe 1,400 across the country that are interred as adults.
You have a minute. You have a minute for your closing thoughts on this.
I don't know what to tell you, Rich, because, like I said, there are different camps here, and it really is a systemic issue. When you talk about not just one protection, that you're upset about, not putting the kid's name in the paper, allowing people to go to the court trial, be privy to the actual sentence or whatever.
I just don't know what's gained, frankly. What is gained by all this secrecy? And please don't tell me it's so that the child can flourish into a great adult. It seems to me if the child's going to flourish into an adult, it's going to figure out how to get away with stuff.
Well, look at the language of the reporting law that protects juvenile.
Will you send us the language of the reporting law?
I will dig some more stuff up. I didn't get, I'm thinking of how much do you fit into 15 minutes with a commercial and whatnot? It's very difficult because you can go on and on about this.
It's 21 minutes of talking time.
Oh, 21? Yeah. It's a systemic issue, so it's very difficult to...
Right, but here's what I'm after. I want to see how the system's structured so that our listeners can see how the system's structured, so we can start taking a look at it and say, does this make any sense? Really?
I know.
And if people disagree with me about how it should be handled, then let's bring that discussion
No, it's a
into
very
the
good
public
debate.
square.
I think it's a good debate, especially with, the level of sophistication amongst juveniles is, that has definitely risen.
Oh.
They've gone from fist to stick to knife to gun now,
To
right?
Facebook.
To Facebook.
Girard at Large time is 7:57. We will be back after the top of the hour with our, we have Kevin Smith who's calling in. He's running for governor. Maybe we'll ask him what he thinks of school violence too. Dr. Jeffrey Czarnec, retired Manchester police officer. Thank you so much for joining us here on Girard at Large.
Got my blood going.
Oh, I think I got everybody.